Hello and welcome to the European Report. Here we are once again in the heart of Europe, in the European Parliament. And today's programme, we're going to discuss the very important issue of the rise of anti-Semitism that we're seeing occurring across Europe, particularly the publication of a very controversial Sunday Times cartoon. We'll also be discussing what does the future hold, particularly after the British Prime Minister David Cameron made a very impassionate speech about the future of Europe, and also said that the British people could have a referendum in 2017 if the Conservatives are re-elected to government. And the other issue we're going to discuss is what is the future for European security in light of the rise of Islamist groups across North Africa. And in today's programme, I'm joined by Timothy Kirkhope, MEP. It's a pleasure to have you on the programme. And Andrew Tucker, representing the European Coalition for Israel, and Joel, Mester from the Israeli Embassy. Timothy, I'm just going to ask you the first question. Can you just explain a little bit about your background and how you got involved in politics, and certainly how you became an MEP representing Yorkshire?
I've had a long career in politics. I've been very fortunate, because some people say that careers in politics, well, I think someone said they always end in failure, but I think other people have said they can be very short. Whereas in my case, I've been very fortunate. I've been involved actively in politics for a considerable number of years, and I suppose I've also had experience of almost everything in the voluntary part of the Conservative Party, but also as a councillor, as a member of Parliament, as a government minister, back in the days of Margaret Thatcher and John Major, and subsequently, and for the last few years now, as a member of the European Parliament. So, as I said, I've had a very broad experience of politics, and to be frank with you, although perhaps I shouldn't say this, and including in it some of the failures when I lost my seat in '97 in Westminster before I came here, I've enjoyed every minute of it. And, you know, all the nasty bits as well as the nice bits. It's really been fantastic. I've been extremely lucky, very fortunate to have been able to do this job.
What's the difference? I have to ask you, what's the real difference between being a member of the British Parliament and also being a member of the European Parliament?
Well, there are a lot of differences. First of all, I mean, I was brought up on the basis of a confrontational approach to politics. I was born and brought up in the northeast of England, where opportunities for Conservatives, particularly some years ago, I think things have got better. I hope they will continue to get better. But historically, being a Conservative, and a very active one, in the northeast of England was not exactly the easiest thing you could do. So, you know, from that point of view, I've been used to confrontational politics, whereas in this place, in the European Parliament, everything possible is done to make it a consensual arrangement. We have differences of opinion across the groups, but the parliamentary system is based on discussion, trying to reach agreement all the time. It grates a little bit with me, because I don't intend to abandon my principles, or I don't intend to abandon my political views to fit with consensuality. So there is a difference in that way. Also, of course, it's abroad, as they say. It's over the channel. It's not local in that sense. So I have to represent a large number of people in the region, 5 million people in Yorkshire and the Humber, as opposed to about 70,000 when I was a Member of Parliament in Leeds. That was an easier job to do, in the sense that you could meet more people and talk to them and be part of the local scene. Here, representing 5 million, I have to make decisions every weekend on whether I'm going to locate myself in the north of Yorkshire, or in Sheffield in the south, or over towards the Pennines. Don't go too far, because of course there is the border with Lancashire, and as a Yorkshire member, you know, one has to be very, very careful about Lancashire, as
absolutely.
You know.
War the roses, absolutely.
But anyway, I think there are differences in that way too, and also there's a less understanding. People are not quite as understanding of our role in Europe as they are of a Member of Parliament or a councillor. I think that's very understandable. I'm almost sympathetic to it, because it is a controversial situation here. We are legislating in a way which actually is not as direct, not as connected as it is with a Member of Parliament.
And Joel, I just want to welcome you back to the European Report, and congratulations as well. Mazel tov, you've just had a newborn baby son.
Thank you very much.
So it's very good. And can you tell us a little bit about activities you've been involved in on behalf of the Israeli Embassy here in the European Parliament?
Well, I mean, the nice thing about being an Israeli diplomat and working in the Israeli embassy, especially in Brussels, is that we have our work cut out for us, as the Americans say. And I mean, there's no lack of challenges and things to deal with and tackle and address. One of the major things in the end of November was, of course, the Palestinian move in the UN. Which really rocked the boat, changed a lot in terms of the prospects of resumption of negotiation, the peace process, really created a lot of new problems to a situation that was already quite complex. So one of the things that we've been investing quite a lot in here in Brussels with our interlocutors in the European institutions, Parliament, Council, European External Action Service and Commission, was exactly that, to try and convey the message that this only complicated things, that this trend cannot continue, and that further unilateral measures by the Palestinians should not happen, should be avoided. At the same time, you know, the need to resume negotiations as soon as possible without any preconditions in order to tackle all the important core issues of the conflict. Another very important thing that we try to raise awareness about and talk about is something that people talked about anyway, and that's the elections in Israel. Always a very interesting topic to follow. I think that in Brussels a lot of people were interested in how things are going in the run-up to the elections, and of course the results. Now the forming of a coalition, that's the process that the main parties embarked on in the past couple of weeks. Now the question is, I mean, what we try to do here in Brussels is to highlight, I mean, one important thing, that you know, unlike maybe some of our neighbors, Israel is a real democracy, and there's a real democratic process there. We saw this as an opportunity to talk about Israel and about what Israel really is, namely a vibrant, dynamic democracy where the fate of politicians is actually decided in the polls. And policy can be changed in a very direct manner by the expression of the will of the voters. And I think this is exactly what we saw in the latest elections. We're still, you know, waiting to see where this is going, what kind of coalition will be formed. But clearly, the type of discussion that we try to create here in Brussels is about Israel as a democracy. More often than not, people in Brussels are tempted to talk about Israel as a democracy in danger. They always put caveats. They always, you know, question whether Israel is truly the only democracy in the Middle East. And we have to remind, unfortunately, we have to remind people that this is exactly the case, and that countries in transition around us are not yet there. We hope that, you know, they will get to a situation where there are functioning democracies that espouse all the values of democracy, not only the process of elections. And this was an opportunity to do exactly that.
Excellent. And Andrew, I know you're looking at your notes there, but can you explain some of the great work the ECI have been involved in? I mean, we had the Holocaust Memorial Service that was organised on behalf of the party. How did that go, and how was that received?
Well, as you know, the Holocaust Memorial is an important part of the agenda of across Europe, and so we've been participating in an event here in the European Parliament for a number of years, together with other organisations. For us, it's important to keep the Holocaust present in people's memory. Where we're coming from is what we call learning from history. We just believe it's very important for Europeans, but more broadly, I think people around the world, we need to understand what's going on in the Middle East and Israel from a historical perspective. This is not, in our view, a conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. This is not a dispute about a piece of land. This is a much broader and deeper issue. And the Holocaust is part of that. It's not the whole story, but it's a very significant part of what happened in history. Part of what we're saying as well is the modern state of Israel is not just the result of the Holocaust. The roots of the modern state of Israel go way back, much earlier than the Holocaust. It's very important to get through this thinking that many people have, that Israel came into existence as a kind of result of the guilt of Europe through the Holocaust. It's not true. The roots were laid way back, much earlier, at the beginning of the 20th century, even earlier. Secondly, we believe this problem, this whole issue about Israel, is really about the existence of the Jewish people themselves as a nation. That's the root of the problem. Does the world want to allow the Jewish people to exist as a nation collectively on this earth? It has to be somewhere. It's in Israel, the place where they were born as a nation. And I think that's the root of the issue we want to get to.
Excellent. And we've got a news clip to go to now.
It has been several years that we have been gathering here to commemorate the memory of the Shoah, the lowest point of Jewish history, and also the lowest point of European history. This is the time of gathering storm clouds. Today is a day of mourning for over 6 million Jews murdered by Nazis.
There is anti-Semitism in Europe. There is a free elected member of a parliament of a member state of the European Parliament asking for registering Jews. This is a shame in Europe. This Remembrance Day is not an exclusive one-day event. It is a permanent duty, every day.
International Holocaust Day is a vital relay for the transmission of memory regarding the greatest catastrophe ever perpetrated by man against man. Memory which speaks to us about the present and the future as well as the past. Memory that warns us about man-made disasters that may still lie ahead.
During the war, Swedes at that time felt very far away from what was going on down there in Europe on the other side of the sea. Not that they were indifferent, but they thought, what can we do? But Uncle Roel was different. He was concerned about what was going on in the world, but nobody could have imagined him as a future superhero. By choosing to defend life, he knew he was losing his comfort, his security, his friends, his job, and that he may even lose his life.
I would like to turn back the winds of time and take you with me to the barrack in Auschwitz-Birkenau, where I was a prisoner 20 months. My number was 45 1554. What I am experiencing here right now was a surrealistic event then. The dream to tell the world kept me struggling to survive and gave me the strength to suffer. Brussels was the first city where I lived after my liberation, and today, in this city, I feel privileged to express my profound recognition and gratitude in the name of those who perished and of those who are still alive, to you, the members of the European Parliament, for making the Day of Liberation the cause of humanity.
In art, in science, in economy, have also a public duty to stand up wherever racism and anti-Semitism is arising, and to say no, no. So as long as I am here, as long there is no racism and no anti-Semitism. This is, if the public leaders are courageous, people will follow.
To go to now that really focuses on the next issue we're going to discuss, and this is the sad return of what we're seeing across Europe, and that's a return of anti-Semitism that has a dangerous implication not only for the Jewish communities across Europe but also for Western European democracy.
Hot on the heels of an apology from international media mogul Rupert Murdoch over an offensive cartoon which upset Jewish groups around the world, the acting editor of the Sunday Times has now offered his own apology for the image published on the 27th of January. Martin Ivins said the associations with anti-Semitism on this occasion were grotesque, and on behalf of the paper I'd like to apologize unreservedly for the offense we clearly caused, which echoed Murdoch's own apology where he also called the image grotesque. The Anti-Defamation League had said the image, which portrays Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu building a brick wall using Palestinian blood and bodies as mortar, harkened back to the blood libel myth that Jews secretly use non-Jewish human blood in their religious rituals. The anger over the cartoon was especially pronounced because it was published on Holocaust Memorial Day. Longtime political cartoonist Gerald Scarfe also apologized for the drawing, saying he was completely unaware it was to be published on Holocaust Memorial Day and that he isn't and has never been anti-Semitic. The Sunday Times, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation, had originally stood behind the political cartoon, saying it was aimed at Netanyahu and his policies, but reversed its position after Murdoch condemned the image via a Twitter message.
Timothy, I don't know if you've seen this cartoon in the Sunday Times. I'd very much like if I just show you the cartoon. Many of you will be very much aware of it. There's a picture of the Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon building a wall, looks like covered in the blood of the Palestinians. Now, surely this goes back to the ancient blood libels, and Sunday Times is a very respected newspaper. What's your views on this?
I would say quite clearly, I've been a friend of Israel, conservative friend of Israel, for many, many years now, and my friendship is a, shall we say, an enjoined friendship where I think I'm free to criticize Israel as well as to praise Israel. I mean, it is by its very nature, it's as a democracy. Well, that of course one of the burdens that it has to carry. It is such a democracy, and this contrast with states around it and so on has given Israel a kind of responsibility in world terms, which is quite a heavy one actually. And I'm very, very much a supporter of Israel, and the difficulties which it's enduring now are things which have to be worked through. I don't think this helps. In fact, I know this is, the newspaper has said, look, this is just the views of Gerald Scarfe, there's no institutional backing, we're very sorry, we apologize, and all this sort of stuff. The trouble is they apologize after the event. With all things in newspapers, once they've happened, you can sue, I suppose, but you know, the answer to this one is, this worries me a lot when I see that, because Scarfe's type of cartoon work is very vicious.
Yes,
I mean, I've seen some of the things with Margaret Thatcher, some of the things with some of our leaders, horrible, nasty, graphic sort of beastliness, all of that. I believe in the free press. I believe in actually saying what it. But what worries me about this particular one, and I think, first of all, the timing of it, which was in line with the Holocaust Memorial events. Also, I have been studying over the years the 1930s in Europe and some of the use of the media, and particularly I'm thinking now of Nazi Germany, where the media was actually controlled. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment this was controlled. It wasn't, of course. That's the whole problem here. But nevertheless, when one looks at some of the rather nastier displays, prejudicial and racist displays, which were attacking the Jewish people who were in Germany and elsewhere in Europe, I'm afraid, I hate to say it, but there was a certain kind of rather nasty similarity about some of the illustrative stuff which we saw from the 30s and this. And that really sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't like it at all, to be honest with you. And apologizing is all very well. I mean, apart from the fact that it is pretty factually incorrect, it is a political statement by a cartoonist. You don't want to stop cartoonists. I support freedom, but I do think freedom with responsibility is what we're on about here.
Yeah. And Joel, I want to bring you in very much on this one because you're representing the nation of Israel, you're an Israeli diplomat. How is the Israeli government tackling this issue? I know that there's a department within the Israeli Foreign Ministry. I interviewed Gideon Bahar only yesterday on the issue of anti-Semitism. Now we're seeing it increasingly more so with very Jewish communities across Europe feeling very vulnerable, particularly in France and in Hungary. And we're also seeing a rise of anti-Semitism at football grounds as well, with recent games between Tottenham and West Ham. We've seen the Hungarian fans cry anti-Semitic remarks to the Israeli national football team when they played each other. How is the Israeli government tackling this issue?
Well, clearly, we're looking at an extremely worrying phenomenon. The rise of anti-Semitism in recent years is a fact, and it's supported by data provided and collected not only by the Israeli government but by many independent sources. I read a very interesting and again very worrying report by the Anti-Defamation League of the United States about trends and opinions of European citizens about Jews, about anti-Semitism, and clearly there is a very worrying trend where these opinions against Jews, against their exaggerated power, so-called, in Europe, in international arena, these things exist and they're on the rise. So the problem is not only that they exist, but also that they are increasing before our eyes. This reality has become really unacceptable, where Jewish life has become really difficult in Europe today. It's very difficult to be a practicing or identified member of the Jewish community in Europe today. I mean, in order to go to a synagogue, you have to go through barriers and policemen and things like that. When I drop my kids off at school, it's a Jewish school, here in Belgium, there's always police officers outside guarding the school. I don't know how many communities have to deal with such an unacceptable reality. The question is how to do that. And I'm not sure that it's only up to the Israeli government. We try to convey the message. We stress the importance of this issue, and we support the efforts of others in this regard. But I think it's also up to European governments and the international community as a whole to tackle this issue more broadly, more profoundly, and get to the root of the problem. I think that coming back to the cartoon, clearly very disturbing. One of the privileges, quote unquote, of being an Israeli diplomat is that after a few years, you become immune to such things because you see so many of them. And I mean, I've seen so many such cartoons over the years. Many of them, by the way, in Arab and Muslim media, which is another question that is very, very worrying as well. I think that a cartoon has a lot of power, a lot of strength in that it can be thought-provoking. But when it becomes mere provocation and a mere show of bad taste, and in this case, including anti-Semitic motifs. That's really something that should be fought against, should be protested, and should not happen, quite frankly.
Absolutely. And Andrew, do you believe that, I mean, we are seeing increasingly high levels of anti-Semitism. I mean, only in Denmark, and I mentioned this on the previous programme, that the Israeli ambassador to Denmark warned the Jewish community in Denmark not to wear anything visible in case they fear of attack. Jewish leaders are fearing the same. We're seeing the French Jewish community very much under siege at the moment. Do you think what's happening really, we're seeing a breakdown of our Judean Christian heritage here in Europe, and so therefore when it comes to Israel and the Jewish people, there isn't that reference point as there was maybe a couple of generations ago?
Yeah. Well, the thing that amazes me about all of this kind of thing is the complete lack of logic in anti-Semitism. I mean, it's incredible that the Jewish community keeps on being picked out as being the sole source of all the world's problems when we have what's going on in the Sahara in North Africa at the moment, and the rise of fundamentalist Islam throughout the Northern African region. We have Syria falling apart and brutal violence going on there, and yet at the same time people say, well, it's all the fault of the Jews. You know, the Palestinians in November they're getting what they want, and yet the more that they seem to get what they want, the more we seem to think it's Israel's fault. So there's something going on, I think, which defies logic. It's not rational, and anti-Semitism is nothing new. I mean, history is littered with anti-Semitism. And it goes very deeply. It's got something to do with Judeo-Christian values, for sure. It's got to do with, I think, some kind of resistance to the idea that there should be a people in the world which claims a degree of specialness, exclusivity, or particularity. We don't like that. Putting aside the Islam issue, of course, the existence of the Jewish nation is fundamentally problematic for Islam. When Abbas spoke in the UN in November, if you read his speech, he did not mention the word Jew once. It was all about Israel. But they won't allow themselves to accept the existence of Jewishness. And the essence of Jewishness is a relationship with the God, the creator of the world. So it's all about rejecting the existence of a people that is connected with the real God who created the world. And I do believe that the more Christians have lost sight of the uniqueness of Israel, the more room there is in the post-Christian Europe for anti-Semitism. It should be the church and Christians who should be standing up in the first place on behalf of the Jewish people, and we're not, because we've lost our understanding that they are still important in God's broader purposes.
And next item we're going to be discussing is what is the future of Europe, particularly in light of David Cameron's speech on Europe, in which he's promised the British people a referendum in 2017 if he's re-elected.
The European Union. That is why I am in favour of having a referendum. I believe in confronting this issue, shaping it, leading the debate, not simply hoping that a difficult situation will go away. Now, some argue that the solution is therefore to hold a straight in-out referendum now. Now, I understand the impatience of wanting to make that choice immediately, but I don't believe that to make a decision at this moment is the right way forward, either for Britain or for Europe as a whole. A vote today between the status quo and leaving would be an entirely false choice. Now, while the EU is in flux, and when we don't know what the future holds and what sort of EU will emerge from this crisis, is not the time to make such a momentous decision about the future of our country. It is wrong to ask people whether to stay or go before we've had a chance to put the relationship right. How can we sensibly answer the question in or out without being able to answer the most basic question? What is it exactly that we're choosing to be in or out of? The European Union that emerges from the Eurozone crisis is going to be a very different body. It will be transformed, perhaps beyond recognition, by the measures needed to save the Eurozone. We need to allow some time for that to happen and help shape the future of the European Union. So when the choice comes, it will be a real one. A real choice between leaving or being part of a new settlement in which Britain shapes and respects the rules of the single market, but is protected by fair safeguards and free of the spurious regulation that damages Europe's competitiveness. A choice between leaving or being part of a new settlement in which Britain is at the forefront of collective action on issues like foreign policy and trade, and where we leave the door firmly open to new members. So the next Conservative manifesto in 2015 will ask for a mandate from the British people for a Conservative government to negotiate a new settlement with our European partners in the next Parliament. It will be a relationship with the single market at its heart. And when we have negotiated that new settlement, we will give the British people a referendum with a very simple in or out choice: to stay in the European Union on these new terms or to come out altogether. It will be an in-out referendum. Legislation will be drafted before the next election, and if a Conservative government is elected, we will introduce the enabling legislation immediately and pass it by the end of that year, and we will complete this negotiation and hold this referendum within the first half of the next Parliament. It is time for the British people to have their say. It is time for us to settle this question about Britain and Europe. Now, I say to the British people, this will be your decision. And when the choice comes, you'll have an important choice to make about our country's destiny. Now, I understand the appeal of going it alone, of charting our own course. But it will be a decision we will have to take with cool heads. Proponents on both sides of the argument will need to avoid exaggerating their claims. Of course, Britain could make her own way in the world, outside the EU, if we chose to do so. So could any other member state. But the question we'll have to ask ourselves is this: is that the very best future for our country? We will have to weigh carefully where our true national interest lies. Alone, we would be free to take our own decisions, just as we would be freed of our solemn obligation to defend our allies if we left NATO. But we don't leave NATO because it's in our national interest to stay and to benefit from its collective defence guarantee. We have more power and influence, whether implementing sanctions against Iran or Syria, or promoting democracy in Burma, if we can act together. If we leave the EU, we cannot, of course, leave Europe. It will remain for many years our biggest market and forever our geographical neighbourhood. We're tied by a complex web of legal commitments. Hundreds of thousands of British people now take for granted their right to work, to live and to retire in any other EU country. Even if we pulled out completely, decisions made in the EU would continue to have a profound effect on our country. But we would have lost all our remaining vetoes and our voice in those decisions. We would need to weigh up very carefully the consequences of no longer being inside the EU and its single market as a full member.
Timothy, you're representing the Conservative Party here. I mean, what are your views on the future of Europe? Because David Cameron made things very, very clear that if Europe's going to work, then you have to bring the will of the European people on board instead of just the institutions.
Yes, I mean, I think one of the mistakes of some of my colleagues back in Westminster is they do say we cannot accept the status quo. But my view, having been here for some years, is that this place is never the status quo. Whatever the status quo may be today, I don't know what the position will be tomorrow. This is a moving feast, and it's a feast that we need to be at the table, and I think David Cameron made that fairly clear in his remarks. But all the major parties, before the last general election, promised the British people that they would be consulted about our role in Europe, and none of the political parties, apart from the Conservatives, seem to be making good on that, and I think he's right to do so. I have no problem at all. He made a very good speech, a very balanced speech, in which, and I agree with him, I think, all the way through that, because he said, on the one hand, we want to remain active players in Europe. Britain can't deny its position in the world, where it is geographically, where it is in terms of trade and economic links and so on. And we should be part of that club, as it were. But it's very important that we make sure we get the momentum to move this club, to move Europe in a way which actually is going to suit the 21st century rather than the 20th century. And I think he feels very strongly that things are not moving at the pace which is fast enough in that way, but also that in terms of British interests, which of course he as Prime Minister is particularly responsible for, in terms of British interests, we do not have the sort of Europe at the moment, or our membership of it, which is best for the British people and for our development. He thinks, I think, that the European Union is sclerotic in many ways, that it is far too concerned with all this internal posturing about, you know, the harmonized position we all have to be in. I mean, it doesn't face the facts. The facts are, of course, that we're nation states. We're proud nation states, all of us. The ones that came in recently, like the Poles and the Czechs and the others from Central Europe, they had years and years in which dictators of one kind or another denied them their rights to their independence of thought, of freedom, denied them the ability to be nation states, recognizing their history or recreating their history, which had been torn from them by Nazis and by the Russians. The truth of the matter is they've got that back now. The thought that they would allow themselves to become just part of Europe as opposed to being proud Poles or Lithuanians or whatever it may be is ridiculous. But of course we need to review things. We need to put Europe on the right sort of footing for the future. And I think it's also right that David Cameron makes good on the pledge that that our party and other parties made, that we will consult the people. So I see no problem with that at all. I think it's going to be tricky getting there. I have to be fair about this, because there are people here who have an attitude which says, how dare the British try to be, on their own as usual, the British go off and do this, that and the other. The truth of the matter is that I think a lot of countries are feeling now that we do have to stop and think and reform Europe. And it may well be, I think, we'll get a better audience when we get underway on this process than we thought we would in the first place. Yeah.
And Angie, I want to bring you in here. I mean, part of the story of Europe is an incredible success story, particularly with the European Union, particularly if we see the horrors of World War II, and the whole of Europe, continent of Europe was ripped apart. And the European Union has actually kept the peace with the help of NATO as well. But you're originally Australian, but you're living in Holland. What are Dutch attitudes towards the European Union and its move towards federalism in light of the mass immigration that's had a real impact upon Dutch society?
Well, I think you see in Holland, like in any other country, this kind of tension, pulling in both directions. Holland is, broadly speaking, I would say, fairly pro-European. They stand very positively towards being part of the European Union. It's obviously very important for them, very small country. At the same time, there is a concern, and it's shared across many of the parties, about the growing influence, the growing power of Brussels, Strasbourg and so forth. But I don't see the tension to be as great as, for example, in the UK. Nevertheless, they were very sympathetic to what Cameron had to say, and he got a pretty good press, actually, in Holland. There's, might be some criticisms, but I think his general thrust of what he was trying to say has been accepted fairly positively.
And Joel as well, we know Israel's not a member of the European Union, but your president, Shimon Peres, has often made many speeches about his wish that Israel would be part of the European Union. Can you talk about some of the benefits of Israel's trade relationship with Europe and how important the EU is to Israel?
The EU is extremely important to Israel. I mean, I cannot overstate its importance. Not only in terms of trade, by the way. I mean, taking part in this integration process in Europe for us has meant a great deal also in terms of cooperation on R&D and exchange programs of many different types. And the future holds the potential for a lot more. We are not member states of the EU, it's not in the cards. We are, though, an associated country, and we have a very elaborate a system of agreements that tie us with the European community. It's very important for us to maintain these ties and develop them. That's why it's so important, for example, that the European Parliament and finally, after a lot of hurdles, passed a very important ACCA agreement last fall, which took away a barrier to the strengthening of economic ties, something that is very important, but it's also a natural evolution of the relations between Israel and the European community. There's so many similarities in terms of not only the economy, but also in terms of the culture, not to mention the history, but also the values. I mean, things that are very important and that we can build on much more.
Joel's had to leave us. He's got meetings with the European Commission, so sadly he's no longer part of the programme. Now, Timothy, I want to come back to you because obviously being British, there's that sense of feeling in Britain now of growing scepticism of the European Union, and particularly its move towards federalism. And this is why we're seeing the rise of UKIP. Isn't it important that not only the British people, but the people of Europe have a voice and a say on the future direction that Europe takes?
I mean, I agree. I think that people should be consulted about it. And I think that the Prime Minister's offer to go to the people with a package once he has actually renegotiated and discussed with European allies what the position will be for us in the future and for the European institutions themselves is the right approach. But I think actually I want to just caution slightly on this rise of European scepticism because UKIP comes and goes. You know, one of the latest polls I think gave them 7%, I think. And actually we've got to be very careful not to overplay this one. Most British people care most about the immediate economy of themselves and their families. They care about whether they have a job or not, to be honest. They care about whether they can get a bus or a train that they can travel on the roads, you know. They care about whether their hospitals are well managed and supplied with a nursing staff. I mean, actually, if you ask people on a poll what are their list of things they're bothered about, I think Europe comes between 14 and about 11 on a good day for Euroscepticism. So I think the issue is we haven't got to overplay it ourselves as politicians. I think we have to recognise there is concern, and the Prime Minister's done that in his remarks and the way in which I hope the party will go forward. But we must not run the risk of allowing the politicians to decide the agenda totally. You know, politicians who are obsessed with Europe or indeed anything else, they must not be allowed to rule the roost. It's the people of the country. They'll be consulted on this issue, but it's the people of the country and what they feel that should matter most to politicians. And I reflect on that, having had all these years in politics. Be very careful as a politician, not to make assumptions that what you think is important is always quite as important to people that you represent.
Yeah. Very much so. And yeah, Andrew here on this one, I mean, the Netherlands is very much part of the European single currency, the euro. How is the European euro crisis affecting Dutch people in terms of its instability and what's happening?
Right. Well, I guess, you know, we've been in a crisis now for a number of years, and fortunately Holland had a fairly stable and strong macroeconomic policy, a good fiscal position, limited debt. But we are starting to see, obviously, quite some effects of it. You know, the government is having to significantly cut back spending, and that's definitely having an impact on the economy. I think, you know, people always say, you know, we hope that it's going to be better next year, it's going to be better the year after, and of course we need to be positive and look forward, but my sense is things are probably going to get worse before they get better. And that may have something to do with the topic we talked about earlier of the rise of anti-Semitism. Again, you know, we've seen it in history, haven't we? The relationship between economic difficulties and the rise of anti-Semitism. And again, there doesn't seem to be a lot of logic to it, but when things get difficult, when things get tough, people start looking for a scapegoat. They start looking for a root cause of the problem. And unfortunately, Israel and the Jewish people seem to be the target time and again.
Yeah. No. Can I just add something on that? I mean, I think, you know, I represented, when I was Member of Parliament in Leeds, I represented one of the largest Jewish communities in Britain. And even then, they had to take a lot of security measures around the synagogues, and they do even more so now. And there have been some appalling desecrations of Jewish graveyards and this sort of thing. And you wonder why. And when people are caught and they try to make an explanation in their own defense, it is usually because they say that we are poor and that we don't like these people in our society, this sort of thing. And there's a kind of nationalistic sort of, but it's all based upon their economic claims or statements that they are deprived and poor, and they're taking it out on groups of people that they probably perceive as being maybe more successful. I mean, because this is one of the other things, is that the Jewish communities, wherever they are very hardworking and very successful, and of course, obviously in religious terms, very committed to their religion. And that may be an issue also with Christians, because we have also seen, I'm afraid to say, discrimination of one kind or another against people who declare their Christian faith. That has been going on certainly in Britain. We've seen that, and I suspect it's probably the case elsewhere in Europe as well.
The next issue we're going to be discussing is the growing rise of Islamism in North Africa, and we'll be asking what impact this will have upon European security in light of the terrorism situation in Nigeria and French military intervention in Mali. We've got a clip to go to now that looks at this in more detail.
France has dramatically announced its participation in the Malian civil war, with a series of airstrikes intended to push back al-Qaeda-linked militants, who captured more ground this week from a government severely weakened by 2 recent military coups against incumbent prime ministers. During the first military coup in March last year, al-Qaeda militants took an opportunity to seize control of the north and have since captured more ground, including the city of Kona, as they seek to take over the entire embattled former French colony, whose president has since declared a state of emergency. Northern Mali has become a jihadi stronghold, with al-Qaeda terror activities and violence financed through drug trafficking and hostage-taking, with Western countries allegedly paying an average of $5.5 million for the release of captured citizens. Since the al-Qaeda takeover, Mali has been seeking international backing for a military force to recapture the area, and in December, a UN Security Council resolution gave official endorsement to a proposed intervention by African forces and other states willing to offer their support. UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon said that in addition to France, Senegal and Nigeria had also responded to the pleas from the Malian regime, while the United States have said they are deeply concerned at the situation and are maintaining a close dialogue with the French government.
Timothy, I just want to come back to you on this one. Now, what we've really seen, haven't we, since Obama came to power in 2008 is a reluctance for military interventionism on behalf of the Obama administration. We're seeing that the French are actively deploying their military forces in Mali. We've seen in Algeria the horrendous death of so many Western hostages at the gas plant. We're seeing a lot of the weapons, certainly dangerous weapons from Colonel Gaddafi's regime in Libya being spread across the Middle East. Isn't this something that Europe needs to wake up to, the danger for for European security?
Yes, I think it does. And of course, I have studied over the years quite a lot this issue of extreme Islam, i.e. jihadi activity. I've been in the United States as part of my US delegation work, talking to groups there about it. And it does seem to me that what we've got to watch out for here is that whilst, Islam itself is not a violent religion, and I have many Muslims in my region who are not only law-abiding, but also very peaceful and just like ordinary members of the community in every respect, working very hard, who deprecate the sort of extremism which we've seen. We must not forget that there are these extreme elements that are using Islam, abusing Islam to back them up in what they are doing. And that factor is being seen in West Africa, it is being seen in North Africa, it is spreading, and also apart, obviously, from areas, Afghanistan and Pakistan and so on. We've got to make sure that we have a response to that. And there has to be, therefore, proper working together, alliances which are used, and positively so, and to be frank with you, we cannot do these things unless we have the United States on board. The United States may well be taking a view, I think it is, from the Afghanistan experience, that they might want to retrench. Now that would be the most dangerous thing, and actually in a way I'm quite relieved that the President has been re-elected with a view that is not one of retrenchment, but one of world connections and involvement still. That's important actually, but I'm not sure when you look at Congress, when you look at the attitudes of the United States, a lot of the people I know there are talking more about, well look, we ought to look after the United States. What goes on in the rest of the world, leave it to others now. And the danger about that is we do need to have military clout in this way to deal with these extreme violent people, to stop them spreading their word and spreading their influence around the world. That is terribly important.
Yeah. And Andrew, just want to bring you on this one because I know that you've visited many African states in the last year or so. Isn't there a growing danger now that it's Christian communities that feel very much under threat with this rise of militant Islam that's spreading right across North Africa, and it almost seems to be following on from the Arab Spring?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's been this case for a number of years. This, the spread of Islam from Northern Africa, particularly Northeast Africa, and now Northwest Africa, down into the Sub-Sahara. Nigeria basically being split in two. You can be relatively safe in Nigeria south of Abuja, but if you go north, you're really in the heartland of radical Islam, radical jihadic Islam.
Yeah.
We're seeing it in South Sudan. A country like Uganda is really now, if you like, at the forefront. It's in the trenches of this battle, it seems to me, between radical Islam and the freedom that underlies the democracies of Central and Southern Africa. And, Africa's been ethnically cleansed of the Jews already and starting to be ethnically cleansed of the Christians. That's what's happening. There is definitely a spiritual battle going on. But I fully agree with Timothy. I mean, it's not just Africa. This is an issue which is facing us in Europe today. And while we may have had 50, 60 years of lack of war, I don't think we have peace. I don't think Europe deserved the Nobel Peace Prize. We haven't reached peace. Peace is not a lack of war. Peace is about a deeply centred and a deeply rooted harmony and respect for each other. We don't have that, I'm afraid to say, in Europe today.
Yeah. And Timothy, isn't there a great danger really that our focus has been very much Afghanistan? We've also had the war in Iraq in 2003. But Al-Qaeda is now developing strongholds and using some of these failed states in Africa as a means to launching terrorist attacks into Britain and Europe. And if we don't tackle this problem now, surely it's going to grow into a much bigger problem in the decades to come.
I used to be a Home Office Minister in the UK, and terrorism was one of my areas. I have to tell you that in those days, terrorism is never a simple issue, but it was simpler. You were fighting, if you like, against certain elements of terrorism which you could understand. The trouble nowadays is that we're no longer fighting wars, the good against the bad, or in large sort of armies deployed against other armies. What we are dealing with now is activity in which it is extremely difficult for the forces of good to deal with the forces of evil, because the forces of evil are deployed often individually or in small groups with the most appalling weapons at their disposal, with creeds or abusing, if you like, religious texts in order to back themselves up and to frighten and scare the population into submission. It is the most appalling concept. And we who believe in democracy and freedom, we who claim to be, if you like, those who will be guardians of people's freedoms to express their views, to have religion and be religious, we're failing. We are failing because we don't have the right plans in place to deal with this new phenomenon. And that is what is worrying me.
Yeah. And Andrew as well, I mean, sadly so much of the church is so silent when it comes down to the issue of persecution of Christians. Now, we've really seen, firstly, over the last century, the ethnic cleansing of the Jewish people in the Middle East. Israel alone, leaving Israel aside, that's where the Jewish people found refuge. But now we're seeing the persecution of Christians throughout the Middle East, through the Arab lands, and also now in Africa as well. Isn't it time that more effort on behalf of the European Union and Western governments was more deployed into actually protecting religious freedom?
Yes, I mean, I think we have to realise it's a fundamental issue. I don't know what Europe can really do about it. I mean, but we do need to understand that there is a fundamental issue going on. And I mean, just briefly, I think what you do see in Africa is the Christians, if they stand up for their faith, they're radical Christians, and I use radical in a positive sense, because they're forced to. They have to stand up for exactly what they believe in. And this is what we're seeing in Europe is a lack, in that sense, of fundamentalism, for want of a better word, amongst the Christian community. We've adopted what you might call a sort of dhimmi attitude towards Islam. Whereas I think we need to realise, and this to me is a great challenge for the Muslim community, to deal with this issue within Islam, is understanding why is this radical element here? What is the force that is driving this jihadic extremism, which is leading to violence? And we call it terrorism, but it's a deep-seated violence which manifests its way in many forms.
Violence is never acceptable behind any kind of religious creed, and I think that the main religions, certainly as far as the texts are concerned, I don't see anything there which calls on violence. It is a hijacking of beliefs, of good beliefs, of proper beliefs, by extremists.
Yeah. Gentlemen, I just want to thank you so much for joining me on today's European Report, and I want to thank you all for watching today's programme. As you can see, the complexities and the challenges that Europe faces in the next coming years and decades are quite large indeed. So thank you for watching today's programme.